You are listening to WCAT Radio, your station for quality Catholic programming. Your selected program will begin right after a word from our sponsor, GroupM7.com, a web design and hosting company. Log on to GroupM7.com today and let them know that WCAT Radio sent you.
You know, my finest childhood memories was the Saturday morning movies. For about 4 bits each, my brother and I could split a Coke and a big box of popcorn and watch movies about Tarzan, Jane, and their Amazon River adventures. Well, maybe that's where Jeff Bezos took his name. His Amazon.com is now the largest online retailer in the world. I'm Michael Mahfood with Group M7, the oldest and largest website design firm in East Texas. And here's my point, and as usual, it's a good one. If your website is modern and up-to-date, mobile and search engine friendly, it matters not whether you sell a product or provide information about your goods and services, your sales justifiably will increase just like theirs. The world uses the internet. We can improve your website and your email. Look at our giant portfolio at GroupM7.com. Since 1995, there's only one web and there's only one group, and it's us. It's Group M7.
You're listening to WCAT Radio, your home for authentic Catholic programming.
Welcome to CAS 892 Exemplary Teaching Practices in Catholic Teaching. I'm Dr. Peter Mango. I'm an instructor in the MA philosophy program with HACS, and I'm delighted to introduce today's guest, Kristian Jaloway, of the John Oberg Advisory, which is based in Austin. Before we get started, we ought to have a prayer. And I'd like to invite our Chief Academic Officer. She wears various hats, has various titles, but Cynthia Toulon. Doctor, if you could lead us in prayer, that would be wonderful.
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary,
Mother of God, pray for us
sinners,
now and at the hour of our death.
Amen.
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 In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. Okay, thanks so much, Cynthia. So I'd like to introduce Kristian Jaloway. Kristian was a missionary for several years, very devout Catholic. He works with John Oberg, I think, at the John Oberg Company, which you can find online. There's a podcast that John Oberg offers. It's very successful firm, and it has positive testimonials. And my understanding, and Kristian go into more detail, but essentially it has to do with applying, among other things, the transformative team practices of Pat Lencioni, very popular writer. You find him very highly rated on Amazon.com and so on. Regarding the dynamics and the formation of teams and their long-term sustenance and improvement on an upward sort of arc. It's sort of Stephen R. Covey, 7 best practices for most highly effective people, all that stuff for the 21st century, if you will. And I'm not going to put words in Kristian's mouth. He'll be able to do that himself. But long story short is when I was reaching out to Kristian, he wasn't fishing for clientele at all. He was, as an outreach personally at the ministerial level, sort of lay ministry wise, preaching out to me as to how to help former seminarians that we knew, a whole network of them interpersonally, basically on a spiritual level, as well as on a practical networking level. And I, through some digging, got out of him what it is he does nowadays. So Kristian's very devout Catholic himself with a young family. But I was fascinated by his day job, so to speak, and wanted to share that with HACS as a possibility of going forward, maybe to help HACS itself at some point because of some other overlay with another entity that we may be working with or approaching. So, Kristian, take it away. Whatever you got presented, we want to hear it.
All right. So I just, if I may for a second, and John hopefully will pop on just to say hello as well, to so you guys can see him as well. But I'd love to understand, well, let me give a brief background on myself. It is relevant. So I actually had the grace to, eventually might have all 7 sacraments. I was ordained with the Legionaries of Christ in 2008. and much longer story about how I left than how I joined. How I joined, I was 19 and eager to go be a missionary and help the world. And there's John.
Hey, John, welcome.
So
thanks so much.
This is my partner, John Oberg, who got me involved with all this stuff. So when I was ordained in 2008, a week later, found out about Father Maciel and some of his scandals. And, we only found out progressively how bad it really was. But that started my actual discernment process, which should have happened a little earlier. It happened at that point and I realized over time that God was calling me somewhere else, and I didn't know where that was. John was one of my mentors when I left the Legionaries, and helped me as I was starting my own business doing leadership development. And a year later said, hey, I think there's some ways we could work together. And since then, it's been, I guess, 3 years, going on 4 years now, that I've been working with John gradually until we just merged all of my clients with the company. And we're doing a, full-time, 90% of my effort now is to coach diocesan priests and pastors in all of the business side of running a parish. So the 70% of the training you can't get in seminary, which is running meetings and everything that has to do with leadership, is where we really concentrate. And John concentrates more. I'll let you introduce yourself, John, but on the healthcare side of that. So maybe I'll let you introduce yourself, John, and then I'd love to hear, since it's a small group, what you guys do, so that I can then we can have a more fruitful conversation for the rest of the time about where this conversation might take us.
Sure. Should I dive in then? Just give you a quick background about how we got this.
Sure, John, go right ahead.
This whole party started. So I was going all the way back to the beginning of my career. I was a 2-sport athlete in college, and I had to find a job that would be very flexible around my athletics. And I did well enough in that company that they offered me a management role coming out of school, to the point that I was managing 100 people immediately out of college and about 1,300 people by the time I was 27 across 12 different locations. I had all types of operations. We took a company from 30 to 300 million. It was a small mom and pop company. And I was never going to get to the head of that company because the son stepped in to then take on all the big roles right across. So I went back to school to get my master's degree in strategic planning, specifically in commercialization of technology and policy and planning. So 2 different focuses that I had, or foci, and I got to work with like nuclear laboratories, and we were, taking technology out and spinning it out into the world. And I left there and I went to work in a couple of startups. I was the CEO of a company. I ended up working for a private equity firm for a year, doing a turnaround of a manufacturing firm that's now kind of best in class for what they do. And after that, I went and worked for a boutique consulting firm for 9 years, helping companies fix problems and then grow. And so during that time, a couple of very interesting things happened. One, I converted to Catholicism. I had a very dramatic moment in life that involved a car wreck that should have been fatal, mixed with some other life events that drove me to go from kind of devout agnosticism to devout Catholicism. It's a fun story that in the middle of it has a 50-foot flight off of the deck of a freeway onto a lower deck that didn't have a landing pad.
Wow.
And, you may not know this, but Toyotas don't fly very well. They come with wings. And so, not yet. So there was this moment of real fear. I lost my father when I was very young, and I had young kids at the time. And so I prayed for the first time in 30 years that if God would let me live through this accident, middle of the accident, that I would come find him. And so I went to a whole bunch of Protestant churches with friends and Christian rock concerts. But really, finding a home in the Catholic Church was really a fun period. It was 2 years of discernment. And anyway, a very fun story. I can tell you the whole thing sometime, but it's been a wonderful trip. Just after I converted, I started wondering if all of these organizational problems I was solving out in the church part of the world might be relevant to the Catholic Church. And so I started working with my local parish priest from the ground up, and he immediately put me into the finance council on the strategic planning board, helping him turn the school around. And I found that all these problems I was solving in companies that were ranged in size from, pre-revenue startup to, my clients have included the U.S. military at the general officer level. When they said, we want to think about leadership for the 21st century, we've heard you talk, you get it. Come teach our generals how to think about this. And so I started in 2009 helping priests, how do we really think about relationships in a way that's healthy? But it was not just me giving back to the church. I also challenged my priest, who's a good friend of mine now. I said, I need you to also tell me if anything I'm teaching you isn't theologically sound. Because if there's something I'm teaching that's not theologically sound, not only will I stop using it here, I'm going to stop doing it the other days of the week where I'm working too. Literally don't want to teach anybody anything that's not theologically sound. So I find ways to evangelize into companies now, in most cases without them even knowing it. About half of my clients are professed Christians, and we talk openly and pray openly together. And half of my clients don't, it's not a conversation. They don't know they're being evangelized to, but we're teaching them how to build better relationships to improve performance. And what we're really doing is talking about how do I give and accept love?
Wow.
In the workplace. And so when Kristian came along a few years ago, I recognized that I couldn't, I do this alone, and we'd need to have a really big team. So we're really trying to have a grassroots movement. There are a lot of movements that they kind of start big and they want to go to the Vatican. They want to start there. But when I've dealt with change management organizations, I find that if you get a toehold and you build a movement at the grassroots, that can be sometimes more effective. And so since 2009, I've been working at doing that just kind of one day at a time. And that's how we got here.
Well, okay. So, John, thank you so much for that. That's really fascinating and informative. I know you could go on and on about the company itself. I think, Cynthia, correct me if I'm wrong, was Kristian going to do a presentation today? Was that
That's
the idea?
what I thought, yes.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, John. I appreciate that. It was quite an intro then to what John Oberg does as a company, what you do, obviously, individually and as a company. And as far as that toehold at the grassroots level, I think it sounds vaguely familiar to something that happened 2,000 years ago. I don't know if anyone knows their church history, though. Anyway, so Kristian, if you want to get us started? Okay.
Yeah, perfect. So, as I'm going through this, we do this presentation for various groups in various ways, and often it's for clergy specifically. Sometimes it's for potential donors who want to support them financially, and so they can go through the programs we're doing for them. Sometimes it's just for other Catholics that are, lay people who just have a big interest in what's happening in the church and specifically around leadership. In fact, we hear often from lay people kind of this voice of frustration, and it's expressed in various ways. And I think part of what it's due to is there's a we try to get to the root causes. And so, I have a slide deck prepared for kind of the donor presentation here, but we might open that here, but I want to start with just kind of framing what is the problem or the problems, the symptoms, and if we can, a little bit more of the root causes, so that if we agree there, we can agree then on what some of the potential solutions are. And we offer some solutions. There's lots of other things going on in the church. I think there's a lot of stuff to be super excited about. But I think if we're honest, there's also things that are happening that are, let's put it this way, there's some issues, right? I think there's some things we can all probably identify. When I look at it, right, I went through priestly formation. I get into the workplace of a priest. I had various tasks. One of them was being vice rector of the minor seminary. I was a vice rector in a novitiate as well. And I assume you guys you guys know all my vocabulary, so I don't have to water it down if you but raise your hand if I say something you don't know. I was working in youth groups around Dallas-Fort Worth area. specific, mostly boys groups with Reagan and Christie and those things. And then helping in parishes. So a lot of, I was never actually had the blessing of being a pastor full time, but every weekend I would be out there in the parishes helping with pastoral ministry in parishes. It's interesting on the educational side. My wife taught high school theology for 9 years after she graduated from Notre Dame with her master's in theology. And so some of our best discussions are theological, well, not debates, that would be a little harsh, but so in all of this, and now especially working full-time, helping pastors, helping associate pastors, helping Catholic educators in their roles, I think one of the biggest things that we see is grace builds on nature. Mm-hmm. Grace builds on nature. And a lot of the problems that we see are not problems of grace. Grace is there. Even theological education is there. I think more of it's been available now in the last decades, especially to laity, than ever before. When I look for the root causes, though, I think a lot of the root causes is the lack of a strong leadership skills, because there really are skills, very specific skills and tools, so that the people who are there to are pastors mostly, without those tools, are not able to let grace flow as I think the Holy Spirit would like. So that might be a little harsh, or it might be a little extreme. But I think at the end of the day, the Holy Spirit wants the church. If we go back, briefly, this is kind of the vision I've heard John say too, maybe I'll let you jump in, John. But, if in the Middle Ages, who brought us the banking system? It was the church in Italy in the Middle Ages. Who brought us the hospital system? It was the nuns, and who brought the hospital system, the modern hospital system here. And it still exists. Who brought higher education, right? Starting in Paris, it was the church. Who brought actually lower school education in every single parish around the world? It was the church. And yet, right now, if we ask who is innovating, is the church relevant for the world? Most people would probably say no, unfortunately. So our answer is, okay, how do we bring that leadership back so that the Holy Spirit can work through the church? And not to say that the Holy Spirit isn't working. I hope that's clear. So that's where we start. Is we see priests who come to us and they're frustrated. They feel like they don't have traction. They're doing all these things. They're working like crazy. They're literally running around like a chicken with their heads cut off. That's their words. And yet they feel like they're not getting things done. Like they're not moving forward. Like the parish is kind of stuck. So some of the very basic things that we start with are, what does your schedule look like? How do you prioritize? How do you get organized? And what system do you use for your inbox, for your meetings, for your, like all those human things that seem very basic? Those things alone make a big impact. And those things we could call kind of professional development. And that's the first big bucket we work in. Then we start talking about things like, how do you actually lead people? How do you actually manage people? There's a whole set of frameworks and tools that we have around leadership. John's developed this over time, especially called it's the role of a leader, creating clarity, execution, building sustainability being kind of the biggest buckets in that. And then we move into all the things around, how do I design a parish now that is actually going to meet both the universal command to go and baptize all nations and yet reach people on an individual level. So I'm going kind of fast here.
Not at all.
Okay. So let me just stop though, as far as like analyzing problems, because then I want to think about what are the problems you guys are working in the academic world of, master's programs, right? For philosophy, theology, pastoral studies. What are the problems you see? Do those correspond to what we're talking about? Or did I miss something big?
Okay, well, I think the original idea, and I'm only learning this myself, so this is not to break the flow of your question at least, was you can if you have a slide deck, Kristian, you could go through another 10 minutes or so, and then we should have question and answer, because I think this is important. Unless, John, you wanted to add something to that. Oh no, okay, not yet. All right. So feel free, Kristian.
Perfect.
At your convenience.
All right, hang on. Let me get to the right page then. I should have been ready. Sorry about that. All right, let's see if I can just share my screen with you guys. There we go. Can everybody see that slide deck?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, perfect. So this is where we start, right? The pastors they're spending 70% of their time on management things that they didn't mostly get training for. So here we would just walk through some of the statistics. We're still losing as a church more adults. This is 6.8 adults, I think, was the last one I saw, leave for every one adult that are baptized in the church. And again, this just goes through what are the symptoms. So 1 in 4 Catholics don't go to Mass regularly. You guys have seen, I'm sure, the statistics on that corresponds to the belief in the true presence of the Eucharist. Right? Only about 25% actually believe in the Eucharist. So it makes sense. They don't go to Mass otherwise. And again, this is what we see all the time. Pastors feeling overwhelmed, isolated. The lack of priests is getting worse, not better. And so we're seeing more and more pastors getting assigned more and more priests getting assigned sooner and sooner. So they have less time as associate pastor to learn on the job. And they're named pastors very quickly, and as short as 1 to 2 years often. Parishes just lacking that sense of community and belonging. I mean, if you look at, we have these suburban parishes where people are moving either away from cities, generally from the Northeast to the South and Southwest, but all these big parishes are losing a sense of community. People, when we ask them, they just feel like they're not being fed spiritually, which leads to all kinds of things. And then leaders just are unsure. Like I talked to, I think it was 8 or 9 bishops last year, just asking them, what are your biggest challenges? And invariably it's like, we don't know what to say. And we have all these people telling us what we should say. And you're a horrible bishop if you don't say this, but we honestly don't know when to speak, when not to speak on a lot of these things that, are really hard topics. So is the problem the priest's lack of activity? In other words, are priests just lazy? This is an actual schedule from one of the priests we worked with. We asked him permission to use it. This is his weekly schedule without all the other unplanned events, like funerals, wakes, hospital visits, weddings, all those things that happen just on top of the regular schedule. So, and I can share this deck with you guys. But it's packed. Like generally we have to counsel priests to spend less time at work, not more. Now there's probably the other problem of priests. We know those types of kind of country club priests too. That's not the ones that are generally attracted to work with us, to be honest. This is interesting because this gets to the conversation later. But people say automatically, well, shouldn't we just change priestly formation? Priests, seminary formators, and bishops that I've spoken to about this problem all tend to agree that although we can make some changes to seminary formation, substantial changes that are going to overcome the problems are not very likely. And as you guys know, the amount of things we need priests to know before ordination is substantial. So I'm not sure. I'd love to hear later how many you guys have in at Holy Apostles that are ordained versus not ordained yet. I would guess it's mostly ordained if they're clergy, since it's master's studies. But we need to look somewhere else other than, and not just put the blame on seminary formation and say they need to include everything. I won't go through that. You guys, I'd love to hear your thoughts, but we can come back to that. So again, why do these exist? The biggest thing is the environment, I think, has just shifted, as we know, from we live in a secularized society, and yet operationally as a parish, roughly we're doing the same things we did 100 years ago, even though now we're in a secularized society where it's really mission territory. So we do the same thing, sacraments and some classes. Another big thing is when we ask pastors, what are you trying to build? What does the parish look like that would be an ideal parish? They have no idea. So we don't have a framework. We don't have a blueprint of where we're trying to go. And that's one, all these are problems that we're addressing with what we're trying to do. You have some of the quotes there. That was a particular priest who a year ago told me, I was stuck. I couldn't get moving. I wasn't sure my time investment, especially in this group, was going to help. But then now, he said, this was again about 2 months ago, he said, I get to my office, everything that needs to be done in the parish is getting done. Somebody's doing it. It took him like 2 years to get there, building up his team, hiring the right people, making some bad mistakes, having to let those people go, getting the right people in the right seats, all of that stuff. So again, there's other solutions around this that we do, but the basic thing that we found most effective for most pastors is just putting them in what we call a leadership roundtable, where they're meeting once a month, no more than 12 priests, actually less usually, because they just have a lot of stuff they need to talk through. So it's usually like 7 to 10 priests, and we're facilitating the conversation. So they're building up, so it stays on track, and we're talking through all those issues they're facing. So it's confidential setting. We're not reporting to the bishop. We're not reporting to their superiors. And they can really start sharing what's going on, and we can talk about those things. The difference, we'll get to the differences here. Here we go. How is this different? So the feedback they've given us is that other priestly fraternity groups, where it's just them sharing, are helpful, but they're never quite sure if there's another way to do it. What we're bringing in is all the experience we have from the rest of the world on how does this work. So teams that are, again, from the military to, fire departments. I got to work with the Houston Fire Department, the third biggest in the country. And it was like, oh, it's the same stuff. but priests don't see that. So here they get to know, is this the best way, or is there a better way? So we're providing those high-level frameworks. We're showing them then how do the programs that you can find, books or other things, or conferences, all those other things, how do they actually fit together with a framework? And then you can see where the gaps are, and you find other things to fill in those gaps. And then just the very basic level is often missing. We have priests that go through all different types of management courses, leadership certificates, and often they come back and they're like, that was so helpful. I don't know what the next step is, though. And that's when we get that phone call. Hey, this was super helpful. Great. Awesome. What are you going to do about it? And they're like, yeah, I'm not sure. And so we're like, great, let's talk about what you learned. How does that apply to where you're at? And what's the next step? And then how do I overcome this hurdle? So a lot of times we'll get these phone calls too. Hey, I just got off the phone with X person, whether that was the bishop or somebody who, a difficult conversation. And they'll want to know, like, did I say the right thing? Did I mess that up? But they have obstacles and hurdles, and they're like, how do I overcome this? And then how do I hold my team accountable? Once they understand, hey, I want to move forward, what does moving forward even mean? Like, how do I put a plan together and then hold my team accountable to that plan and actually move my parish forward? Here is just when people ask us about content. Again, this goes through the big 3 frameworks that I already mentioned. So the personal professional development, the leadership development, and then the organizational design. And that could be a parish, it could be a diocese, it could be a ministry, a campus ministry, whatever it might be. Tools. Oh, yes. This is just to say, what do we mean by tools? So we get frequently asked questions. And a couple of years ago, we took time to go out and take the first 200 questions that we get asked consistently and put them into tools, which are 1-page documents along with an empty template and examples of how to use them. And so when we have one of these conversations with a pastor or layperson, for that matter as well, who might work in pastoral ministry, we follow up always with, this is the PDF on this topic. We usually do it after the phone call, so they're not completely overwhelmed by just more and more documents. But then, so we don't give them a book to start with, which seems to just overwhelm them. We give them, this is the thing to do to solve your problem. And then I'll follow up with an email, which you can reference with a PDF on exactly this problem and nothing more. So it's very synthesized and it's very specific to their issues. Again, this is designed mostly for donors, but what can a layperson expect if their pastor is going through this? So generally, this is what we see. It's just happier, more fulfilled pastors, more availability of the priest's time because the priest gets to win their time back. I don't think any pastor that I know said, hey, I really love paperwork. I really love, for that matter, I would be interested. How many academics love meetings and love, right, all the paperwork that is included in being a professor? Most of them want to teach. Most pastors want to be pastors. And so the goal is to win their time back. Yes, you have to invest something. Otherwise, it just is status quo. So if you invest time, you gain your time back. Openness to new ideas and innovation. Often pastors are just overwhelmed as it is. Any new ideas just get shoved to the side. And that frustrates lay people who want to help. We find staff become more engaged, more professional, clear vision and direction for the parish. That can take time, but eventually that comes. A detailed pathway for discipleship. This is a little bit more advanced, where instead of being up to chance that a person walking through the parish somehow gets involved, we actually take hold of that person and walk them by hand through a detailed pathway to grow into discipleship. What does that actually look like? What are the steps? How do we help them get there? Leadership team, right, to aid the pastor. A lot of this stuff, again, this comes from Lencioni with the Amazing Parish talks a lot about this. Pastoral and finance councils. All the time, one of the first questions I get is, how can I shut down my pastoral council? It's totally useless. I get this constantly, right? They can't shut down the finance council. They know that because it's canon law. And so we start asking, like, okay, how do you prepare for your pastoral council? How did you choose them? How did you? And they're like, they don't know. They have no answers. And so we're like, well, no wonder it's a disaster. Any meeting would be a disaster if it was left to chance like that. Like, there's some really basic things we need to get done. And they're like, oh, the pastoral council can actually help me? This is amazing. Like, why didn't we do this earlier? Like, well, great question. Right? Spiritual growth, stronger community. That's a big one. And just better stewardship of resources all the way around. So, and for donor, we put this one in there, your eternal ROI. Frank Hanna has a great talk on this one and how there is an eternal return on investment for donors. These are the results that pastors themselves and lay leaders who work in parishes have given us, parishes and dioceses for that matter. So just having that group of peers that are there for you to listen, to mentor, to live life together, to think together. There's that phrase, leadership is lonely at the top, or it's lonely at the top. It really doesn't have to be. And these are the kinds of groups that they come back to the group time and time and again. Yes, the content's great. Yes, the formation it gives is great. It's the camaraderie and having those peers who are there going through the same things together that honestly, at the end of the day, are the greatest. It's the strongest thing that holds the group together. Education, again, all those topics. This is another one that made me laugh, but I quoted him now. One of the last groups we started down in Victoria, Texas, literally one of the priests stands up and just screams like, "This is the class I never had in seminary." So as much as I think that, anyways, it was just funny. It was very spontaneous, and I couldn't have asked for a better quote. Clarity on what your role is. Surprise it or believe it or not, when you ask pastors, what is your job? They're like, well, and they start thinking back to theology class, like, okay, sanctify. Yeah, but what's your job description? How do you know if you did your job? Like, I don't know. So we wrote them a job description, right? And like clarity on what your role is, plus how many people in your parish have a job description that makes sense. Like, I don't know. So leading staff and volunteers effectively, this is a big one. Like they want to, and often they're just stuck. So let me go a little faster here. Leading up the chain of command. Again, how do I present things to the bishop? How do I present things, going up the chain of command? Connecting with people better, confidence in the midst of uncertainty. Man, during COVID, and now that COVID's kind of opening up a little bit more, we get a lot of phone calls around, what do I do? How do I navigate this? What do I do in crisis? And finally, just that feeling I can actually launch out into the deep now. Like I don't have to sit back and wait and be reactive. I actually have tools to go out and make a difference.
Just two questions, Kristian.
Sure.
First of all, what you just have explained so far, I have one question for you, one question for John, if John can answer as well, is we're talking about pastors, but this also can be applicable. We have deacons, a lot of deacons in our program, or those in formation to be deacons. We have Catholic religious sisters who may, who may have to become superior or, religious superior either of their convents. Not that should be an ambition of theirs or anything, but they may have to direct apostolates. These skills are presumably transferable as well, correct? For on-site students?
Yeah, okay. Absolutely. And we've been using this consistently with lots of different types of groups. So, yes.
All right. Thank you. And John, what are some of now we heard Pat Lencioni's name mentioned. Obviously, there's your own vast and varied experience. What other sources, if any, have entered into or impacted your thinking, like writers, speakers, and so on?
Great question. I've tried to read leadership books in the last 200 years pretty specifically, and then study anthropology and sociology over the last 2,000 to 20,000 years to look at what things have been cyclical. And then I just had conversations in the last week about what happened in the fall of the Roman Empire and the leadership problems that happened in the empire, and then the pre-Roman Empire, what happened with the Caesars before that, and what mistakes were made, and how you saw those same mistakes later in the Ottoman Empire, and what mistakes you're seeing now in America in a more worldly sense. And then I'm also getting a doctorate in social work that looks at systems theory. So I'm actually getting a doctorate that looks at the policy level, the community level, and the individual level, and how you tie those systems together for behavioral change. And so I think for me, what I would say is it's a very systemic approach. My belief is that truth is truth. It comes from one place and one place only. It's not relative. And so if you can find truth, no matter where you can find it, it all points back to God. And so that's been my approach in trying to uncover the maxims that lead us to, the best management book of all time, my opinion, is the Bible. You go back and, you joked earlier about how grassroots movement was created 2,000 years ago. Well, that's precisely right. That's exactly what we look to. How do you win hearts and minds? And at the end of the day, if we don't manage the church better, but we create geometrically more disciples, we will consider that a win.
Okay, I appreciate that answer, and I know there are others on the call who will as well. Sebastian Mahfoud is muted right now. He's sort of in between two things, but he has a degree in business as well as degrees in theology and philosophy. And Dr. Cynthia Tulin, our chief academic officer, is a trained sociologist, was that for decades before getting her theology degree. And I know you're pushing my buttons here. I love watching Kings and Generals on YouTube and other things of that nature, and like history on the side. I know we also have an organizational psychologist who's former CEO on Hack's staff. And you would remember his name, Cynthia. It's escaping. If I saw it, I would know what it was. That's terrible. But if it occurs to me.
Joe?
No, Layman.
Layman?
Yeah. Is it Paul Veit, Beit, or Sebastian will know. Richard, maybe I don't remember, excuse me.
Yeah.
In any case, well, that's all fascinating. And systems theory is fascinating field, as history is as well. But okay, I'm obliged to open the floor for questions at this point according to the format. So I'm not saying, Kristian, that we should not continue with the presentation. On the contrary,
the substance was done. Yeah. So I would love to, there's some more details on strategy and things, but that's.
All right, Robert, you had your hand up there. Sorry.
Yes, and let me say I'm not a doctor and I'm not a priest, and nor is my wife Corrine. But right out the chute, I wanted to thank you, John, for beginning this, and I'm sure God's hand was in that. And glad to see you made it through the accident. Please give me the address of that bridge, because I want to just write that down and put it on where I can stick it. So
you can bridge.
Take another.
You can see.
There's actually a video about it.
Yeah, there's a group named Cast who made a 7-minute video. If you just look up my name, John Oberg, and then they titled it Grace and Mercy, or Mercy and Grace. And you'll see the 7-minute video, and they show a picture of the bridge that I went off of, among other things.
Well, these things happen, and we wonder why it has to go to that extent, that something good comes out of something horrendous. And I'm sure it was for you, but on behalf of my wife and me, thank you so much. And Kristian, thank you for what you have contributed by meeting John. The first thing that came to my mind, because I actually thought this session was on another topic, and I spoke to Sebastian earlier today, and he said, "Oh, great, because he always sends me a link to these things." But this is one of those times where I am so glad the mistake was made, because, and let me tell you why. I have been mentioning to priests and lay people for decades and acting on what I'm about to say, and that is think outside the box. And that's a phrase that could very much apply to what the two of you are doing here. And I support it greatly. I mean that. I am relieved to know that your organization is around, that you're around and doing this. To give you some examples, I have to refer to myself, which just bear with me as I'm doing this. But I think Pope Francis years ago came out with something, I wish I could find the documentation, about thinking outside the box. He said, you have to go out, the shepherd has to be with the sheep. And but he was also saying, in his words, thinking outside the box, you can't be doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over again, especially if you're not getting anywhere. So the reason I would say to my pastor, other pastors, think outside the box, and how I related that to my own experience, and I'll make this as short as I can. It's just bear with me. I I would say to priest, it's come up with new ideas, such as, I'll give you a very good example. I happen to be in show business, and as an actor, I've done a lot of stuff, and as an entertainer and a stand-up, done a lot of stuff. And my pastor came, I said to him in the parish hall many years ago, I said, Father, if you need any help, he was raising funds, let me know. So he said, Robert, I think you could help, actually. And at the time, and for many, many years, I had my own 17-piece orchestra and sang and did comedy and stuff like that. So we went ahead to do that. Number one, it's never been done at a parish. Number two, that I know of, where what I was bringing was done at a parish. And when I got together with the committee, which I said, we need to form something here, and somebody's got to head it. And they came, and we had somebody for publicity. And usually that person who does publicity, he'll put it in the bulletins and that's it. And I said, no, you got to get out of Our Lady of Grace, and you've got to go. Why don't you go to the daily news? Why don't you find out who the radio stations are? Then they came up, the same two people came up with a flyer, parish annual festival or whatever. And I said, nix it. Put Robert Hanley, backed by a 17-piece orchestra, sings the song of Sinatra, Bobby Darin, Sammy Davis Jr. Cut to the end of this little segment. 500 people attended. After I was done, people came up and said to me, several people came up and they were positive in their comments. And I said, my question was always, how long have you been a member of the parish? And I'd say in 3 or 4 instances at that parish, they'd say, oh, we're not members of the parish. We just heard you were performing here and we showed up. And they bought a table, which is a significant amount of money. Tables. So the reason I mentioned that brief thing is thinking outside the box. That kind of mindset, which is not to say, it adds to, Kristian, what you were saying, that you need the spiritual. We need the sacraments. We need everything that the priests are taught at the seminaries. But you need to get out of there. You need to come up with ways. I'm thinking in my head, I said to some people not too long ago, I said, why don't you have tours of the church and put it in the local paper, not the Catholic paper, but in the Encino, California paper. That will bring people in. And that's a start of getting out of the thinking outside the loop. And then do things, where you could have something, like a wine festival, but don't have it at the parish necessarily. In this case, you could have it block off the boulevard, or you can have somebody talk about what we're doing in this, like in today's day and age with prejudice. Have a march, call ABC TV. I mean,
you're right. That's a great point, Robert. I don't mean to cut you off. I just know Alan had a question as well. Alan, I think your microphone is muted. We can return to what you said, because I think you're absolutely right. Is thinking outside the box is one of the problems that we have. And I think what Kristian was saying is that because pastors feel overwhelmed by their schedules, any new idea, maybe you've probably had this experience, I know I have, Robert, is, they're like, oh, one more new idea. One pastor literally told me, we don't like to do new things around here.
Yeah, but Kristian also said you need to manage there.
Yes.
I understand it, what Kristian and what John are saying is
right.
Father, I've heard this before. You got a lot on your plate and all of that. Right. You need to manage. That's what Kristian is talking about. So
exactly.
Following that lead, get the manager and make the changes. And what I'm saying is just it furthers that with ideas about how to do that.
Absolutely.
You're so right. Yeah.
And I think,
go ahead, Alan.
I think related to that, and then I have a question on a different topic, but it takes a little bit of strength and courage, because if you try to go outside the box, you might offend some people in the parish. They may not like it, but yet, it may be good for the parish as a whole. So having a vision to see what's beneficial for the parish as a whole, I think is important. But I was just going to ask, I teach at the seminary in Los Angeles, and I think you're right. I mean, the students have a really packed schedule. We always add new classes here and there, like canon law on annulment or whatever. So trying to deal with the practicalities is hard. So I think it does make sense to do it after ordination. But when would you see as the best time for a priest? Is it after being a pastor for 3 years and failing miserably, or before they become a pastor? I mean, when do you think is the ideal time for them to take this program?
I guess in a perfect world, as soon as possible. And we do have interest from various dioceses who are looking at it as a way to kind of take over their early ministry program. Or like here in our diocese, the early ministry program is useful, but not extremely practical. So pastors, let me answer this way. What we're discovering is that associate pastors, by and large, have nobody that is helping them in a conscientious, deliberate way, mentoring them to become a pastor. Yet they know, because of the priest shortage, which is getting more acute, not less, at least for the next 10 years, that they are going to be named pastors sooner and sooner and sooner. So that time to learn just by watching is shorter and shorter. So when I talk to associate pastors, they are ecstatic to know that there is something that can help them in a deliberate way preparing to become pastors. By the way, when we started this first group just for associate pastors 6 months ago, only one is still associate pastor. They've all been named pastors. Mm-hmm. And so we're getting not monthly phone calls, but weekly, sometimes daily phone calls. Hey, what do I do here? What do I do here? What do I do here? I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad somebody's answering the phone call, right? Wow. Because the diocese doesn't have time to handle that.
Wow. Cynthia, did you want to? Yeah, please.
Yeah. So one of the things that occurs to me is that we have a situation in the church where we have many, many Catholics who don't believe the faith, don't go to Mass. And the few that do, it's still overwhelming the pastor because of their lack of business knowledge. So one thing, I mean, I know from teaching here at Holy Apostles for 24 years, I know that we teach them the theology, but I think that what's lacking is that they need training in the seminary, apart from the one parish administration course, which isn't going to do it. And then that would be a base that could be built upon by the kind of things that you men are doing. To me, the situation we're in is equivalent to asking somebody to take over, I don't know, maybe $1 million business a year based on one course. So, then they don't understand why it's not going well.
Right.
Exactly. So that there needs to be more emphasis on that in the seminaries. Because it isn't just a matter of preaching the word. That's obviously the most important. But if you don't know how to organize that church, it's going to not go well. So, that's where I think the initial problem is. I mean, certainly if you take courses, I mean, I was in the business world before I was in the business world as a statistical sociologist in the insurance industry. And, it's good to have the classroom knowledge, but then when you go out into the real world, that's when you need the mentoring and the help. But you have to have the basic skills, and they don't. I mean, some may have that natural turn towards it, but I think the majority don't. So I've seen in many parishes, that there's a real struggle, and you can see part of that struggle. I think part of the reason that that pews are not as full as they should be, and that people are not donating as much as they should be to help the parish, is because they don't see the priest as a leader in the institution, but more as a teacher of the faith. And even there, I mean, you know, when you look, I mean, you were saying, what were you saying about about believing in the real presence? How many don't believe in it?
I think it was like 75%.
Yeah.
75% do not believe.
Correct.
Yeah, and it's not even that they're disbelieving or rejecting; it's that they have no clue.
Yeah,
they're
and
uncatechized.
they also have no clue, and they have no interest. But it's not just things like real presence; it's all of these dogmas and the morals. I mean, you know, Catholics are about even with the secular culture in believing abortion, birth control, and believing in heaven. And in fact, one of my favorite stories to tell to my moral theology students in Catholic social teachings is that I know of a person that the husband had a vasectomy because they were devout Catholics and they knew they should not use birth control. Mm-hmm. All right. So, I mean, that's where the level is. So, yeah.
Can I address,
John?
Cynthia, I'd love to address a couple things. I joke with people all the time that I'm a pro-choice Catholic. I just think the baby should be the one making the choice.
Yes.
As soon as they turn 18. I think we have a language problem in the U.S., but we can get off into that topic separately. The question that I want to come back to is, when should people start learning this? Should it happen in seminary? And the buckets of skills that people need to be successful, there's an individual knowledge of self, there are leadership skills, and then there are organizational design skills. Yes. The organizational design skills are the ones that bishops must master to be really successful. And then, the auxiliaries and the people that work at the diocesan level, the leadership skills that we're talking about, and some of the organizational design skills are important for management at the parish level, depending on the size and complexity of the parish. It would be most effective to teach the individual skills early on in the seminary, but we end up having to teach all three of those sets of things because we're dealing with such an acute problem at the pastoral level. If we could take that acute problem and back it down a few steps to where we're dealing with the chronic issue of wellness, of the health of a parish, we would be teaching the individual skills in seminary. We would then continue that tail throughout their career, and just, it would be a large amount in the beginning, and then just, making sure that we continued that in education over time. And then there would be lots of teaching around management right before someone became a pastor for the first time. And they would practice those skills in their ministry and the organization of the volunteers inside of their parish. And then we would teach the organizational design skills as a pastor, and then follow those on with bishops and make sure they had those higher level organizational design skills. But what we do instead is we have pastors that come in, they rip out the entire organizational system of their parish and start it from the beginning. I'm becoming more and more convinced that that's a form of spiritual warfare. Wow. Where the enemies come in and said, you know what, I'll just teach you to, just since you're so reliant on prayer, I'll just teach you to rip out the management system every time and set you back every single time. And I could talk for hours on why I could hopefully convince you that's the case. And I think we can stop that trend.
Wow.
I believe you're correct. I see spiritual warfare on a daily basis at the seminary, and it's just by confusing things. It's very easily done, or making people misunderstand something. It doesn't have to be something like you'd see in a movie.
John and Kristian, by the way, hello, Cynthia.
Hi.
John and Kristian, wouldn't you say that what you are offering would be at least possibly be, but I think would be for the pastor to not rule out getting someone else in charge, which would, in other words, hire somebody or whatever to work with him at one point and still do what you're doing with the seminarians and the priest. But part of it is, you have to listen to the priest as well, that they're so inundated with stuff. This is just something else. That's a point. Well, your point is get a business-like mind, for lack of a better term. And part of that business mind might be to get somebody on board that can help you do that. I get that from what you and Kristian had already said to me, but I just thought I'd bring that to your attention. Is that
definitely part of it? We one of the first things we give them is, again, this is a blueprint of where we're going to go eventually, and part of that is the organizational, the org chart for a parish. So in other words, who are all the people you should have? What are the qualities, characteristics, job descriptions of all those people? And what we find, especially in the very beginning, is how do you actually bring in somebody who's highly functioning, professional person, manager, for example, and then have somebody with almost no management skills or experience in charge of that manager?
Right. Yeah.
And they're speaking two different languages.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't know, and this person is coming from a strong business or, for example, military background and trying to use that language in the church. And this person speaks theology and philosophy and pastoral, right? And so what we're doing is building up the priests so they can manage that kind of person.
That's wonderful.
Not to mention there's a canonical issue, right? That the priest can't give up control at a certain level because they have to make certain decisions. And when they don't understand the gravity, like one of the things that I'm really torn up about is that we use the word stewardship for raising money. That is not stewardship. That is one piece of stewardship. And so we need to get back to helping the pastor understand the full breadth of their responsibility. And we've uncovered this for pastors. They're grateful. We've had very little resistance when we kind of shed the light on this. They say, thank you. We didn't see it this way. And so our framework should be inclusive of other organizations like CLI, who's doing some of this work. And like, we think there should be lots of organizations doing this, not just us.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting take it away from the pastor. I'm just saying you have a president, you have a vice president.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's right.
And by the way, we're going to have to wrap up from a format perspective with a prayer in a moment. I just want to say, if anyone has wondering about Robert Hanley, just check out the Internet Movie Database, and you will find out who he is. He's an actor and entertainer of decades. Who still appears on WCAT Radio. So, just in case you were wondering what role he played in Hacks, well, he's a good friend of ours.
Well, I have a little bit of time afterwards if you guys want to stay and talk or have other questions, or we can Peter can send our info if you want to.
I think it's great.
I would be happy to share any information that you forward, Kristian. And I'm wondering, John, thank you again so much for appearing. Thank you, Robert. And I'm sorry, Robert, your wife's name again. Maureen, thank you so much. And Alan, thank you so much again. And especially, in a special way, Cynthia, our academic dean and chief academic officer. She works closely with Father Peter Kuser, our president at Holy Apostles. So we really appreciate this. But Kristian, if you could, thank you again so much again for the presentation. And if you could maybe close us out with a prayer. That would be wonderful.
Absolutely. In the Father and Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, we thank you today for this opportunity to come together and meet these brothers and sisters in you. We ask you to bless all of us as we go forth, as we are working in your vineyard in various ways with your priests and seminarians and leaders. We ask you to guide us, help us to hear today what you want us to hear and take out of this conversation whatever it is you want us to do. We ask you to bless all of those priests who are stuck, all those leaders who aren't sure what their next step is. Help them, give them light and clarity and blessings. Help our Holy Father and our pastors, our bishops, in their special role to lead and guide our church. And help all of those who are working for the good of the church. Give us all your blessings, your peace during this Easter season as we rejoice in the resurrection and in the knowledge that you have overcome death and you fill us with your light and grace every single day. We ask all of this through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
Amen.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints.
Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
Thank you for listening to a production of WCAT Radio. Please join us in our mission of evangelization. And don't forget, love lifts up when knowledge takes flight.